You're listening to Doing Time, Talking Crime, a podcast that showcases the research currently being conducted at the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Crime, Security and Law in Freiburg, Germany. My name is Christopher Murphy, and I'll be sitting down with researchers to talk about their projects, the various methods they use, and how their findings have impacted legal, criminological and psychological research in Germany and abroad. All this and more on Doing Time, Talking Crime. Well, thanks very much for tuning in to the next episode of Doing Time, Talking Crime. And on today's episode, we're actually going to be discussing something a bit different. We're going to be talking about how science, and in particular neuroscience and psychology, can be used as a tool to reevaluate our understanding of punishment and to possibly make our criminal justice system more humane. To do so, I'm joined in the studio by Federica Coppola. Federica studied law at the University of Bologna and completed her PhD at the European University Institute. Thereafter, she worked for 3 years as a postdoctoral fellow at Columbia University before joining the Max Planck Institute in the Department of Criminal Law in April 2021. Federica specializes in criminal law theory, restorative justice, incarceration, and human rights. And her work has been published widely in a number of journals of an interdisciplinary nature. And to top it all off, she's recently authored 2 books, the first in 2021 entitled The Emotional Brain and the Guilty Mind, Novel Paradigms of Culpability and Punishment, and the second, which is to be published shortly by Cambridge University Press, entitled The Real Pain of Punishment, Eradicating Social Exclusion from Criminal Justice. Wow, Federica, an impressive resume. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. Well, so today we're going to be talking neuroscience, science, psychology, prison, and how, I guess, we can have a more humane criminal justice system. So maybe let's begin by talking about one of the least humane aspects of the criminal justice system, or punishment, which is solitary confinement. I know you've done a lot of research on the subject, so maybe before we delve in to look at how solitary confinement affects people who are in solitary confinement and their brains and mental well-being, can you maybe tell us a little bit about what solitary confinement actually entails?
Sure. Solitary confinement, which is also known as administrative or punitive segregation or carceral isolation, is a condition of detention entailing the isolation of an individual from the rest of the prison population upwards of 22 hours per day, every day, with no meaningful social contacts apart from sporadic interactions with correctional officers. Most commonly, cells used to accommodate people in isolation are just a few square meters large, poorly furnished, with a small bed or a cot and a blanket, a sink and a toilet. Oftentimes, isolation cells are provided with windows, so there is natural light. At other times, there's not even a window, so there is artificial light on 24 hours. Most facilities are provided with segregation units or wings where people spend their time in isolation. Alternatively, solitary confinement can be the overall regime of certain facilities. You can think about supermax facilities in the United States or supermax facilities for mafia people in Italy, where people constantly live in a regime of extreme isolation. It is important to emphasize that people who are kept in isolation have limited access to rehabilitation programs like sports, for instance, or education, or even therapeutic programs, and they're also limited to get prison visits and communication with their significant others.
And that means that then contact is really only with the prison guard. when you're in solitary confinement?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
So depending on the legal system and also on whether solitary confinement is a part of a criminal sentence or is an overall prison regime or is a correctional measure, its duration can really be open-ended. So it can last a few days, a few weeks, it can last months, it can last decades, and in some cases, it can even last permanently.
Permanent solitary confinement.
Yes.
22 hours a day.
Yes.
In a small room by yourself. Cool.
So, and even if the law mandates certain temporal limits, like, for instance, international standards, the Mandela rules mandate a maximum period of 15 days to be spent in solitary confinement. Oftentimes, especially when solitary is applied as a correctional measure, its duration is really at the hands of prison staff.
Okay. And then can, for instance, if someone's in solitary confinement, do they then have access to lawyers, or is it really then difficult once you're in solitary confinement to come back out? You're at the behest of the system?
That depends. There are systems where solitary confinement is under the review of courts. So people who are sent to solitary confinement also have the right to access hearings, and so there is a court review. In other cases, there is no such a court review. So people in solitary, in theory, have the right to see their lawyers, of course, but there are times in which abuses can occur, and there is evidence that these abuses do occur. So the risk that correctional officers can abuse this practice is quite high.
So you said that solitary confinement, I mean, there's obviously lots of different forms from 10 days to 10 years, which sounds horrendous, to be honest. What then are the damaging effects of solitary confinement? Maybe also talking about what happens, when does one begin to notice such effects? Are they of an emotional character? Are they of a physical character? Or are we talking both?
We're talking about everything. So there are tons of scientific studies from a variety of disciplines that have extensively and consistently proved the damages of socio-environmental deprivation, which is the condition that solitary confinement entails. So these damages can be bodily, mental, emotional, and neurobiological. These damages are complex and they are interconnected. To give you a short list, these damages include, but they're not limited to, post-traumatic stress disorder, memory loss, reduced cognitive functioning, paranoia, hallucinations, obsessive thoughts, suicidal thoughts, but also risk of fractures, cardiovascular diseases. And what is interesting and concerning at the same time is that these issues can emerge after a short period of time.
And this is really spanning the gamut, so really from all kinds of mental health issues through to physical issues as well. And also after a short time, you say?
Even after a short time.
And when we say short time, what do we, ballpark figure?
It depends on the kind of implication, but also after a few weeks of isolation. And they can grow and manifest over time. And these kind of damages not only affect people with pre-existing vulnerabilities, but also healthy populations. So everybody is exposed to an objective risk of developing issues following even a short period in solitary confinement. Not everybody will undergo the same effects because some people are more resilient than others, but there is an objective risk of harm following even a short period of solitary confinement. And another interesting data is that these kind of effects continue even after the person is reintroduced to their social environment.
So they can be long-lasting
or even permanent. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And when it comes to psychological and psychiatric effects of solitary confinement, these kind of effects have been associated with damages occurring in the brain.
The brain changing, physically sectioned, or either dying or acting or behaving differently.
Yes. So studies have indicated reduced cortical volume or poor neural proliferation in the hippocampus, which is the location of our memory and our spatial navigation. Also heightened activity in the amygdala, in the reward system. So there are damages occurring pretty much everywhere in the brain. And these damages have not only been associated with psychological symptoms of anxiety and so on and so forth, but also with major psychiatric disorders like PTSD or neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer.
Okay, wow. So that's really kind of some long-term effects there, knock-on effects from solitary confinement.
Yes.
How is that actually then measured, or how do you gather, or how do scientists gather evidence of what happens during solitary confinement? For instance, those sent to solitary confinement tested beforehand and after, or have brain scans, or is it using something else to measure the damage caused?
It depends on the evidence that you want to gather. So normally clinical and observational studies, psychological studies, behavioral studies are run directly with people impacted by solitary confinement. So there is direct evidence with prison population. While studies on the brain, you can imagine that it is quite hard doing brain scans with people who are in solitary confinement.
Right, yeah.
Bureaucratically speaking, it's difficult to do such studies in prison, and you can imagine that correctional facilities might not be so willing to allow these studies, but it's also methodologically difficult. So neuroscientists making arguments against solitary confinement draw upon studies conducted with general population and with animal models, notably with rodents. And the reason why experiments with rodents are used to make arguments about the human brain is because rodents present neurodevelopmental trajectories that are very similar to humans.
I see. Okay.
However, a neuroscientist at Columbia University who I spoke with, and he works on isolation and rodents, and he was also involved in challenging solitary confinement. He told me that the human brain is a social organ, is naturally programmed to be connected with other brains and the social environment.
Right, yeah.
So the negative effects of extreme isolation are particularly high with rodents. And you can imagine how intense they are in the human brain, which is far more social than the rodent's brain. Yeah. So the effects that we see in rodents that are already quite bad, both psychologically and behaviorally, are way more amplified in humans.
Sure, okay.
So you can imagine what happens.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. When you conduct these studies and when we learn about the damage that solitary confinement can cause to the human brain, and all the emotional and physical knock-on effects, can these findings then be used in prison-related litigation or to support criminal justice policy reforms?
For sure, evidence about the damages of solitary confinement from a psychological standpoint and from a neurobiological standpoint have entered prison litigation. So amici briefs or expert witness testimonies have widely reported the negative effects of solitary confinement in courtrooms. And this kind of evidence is also being used to support policy change to reduce the use of solitary confinement, especially with more vulnerable populations like people with pre-existing mental illness or with particularly young people. And solitary confinement is a common practice also for youth in systems like the United States.
And when we're talking youth, what are we talking?
Adolescents.
So from
16, 17 years old.
Wow, okay.
Yes, but also young adults, 18, 19. They are not more adults than late adolescents. So they're still young and they're still under development. So their brain are still developing. So they're still vulnerable to negative...
Absolutely, I could well imagine it's even more traumatic.
Yeah, so the effects of solitary confinement can be even more traumatizing for people who are in their younger age.
We talked a little bit before prepping for the show that you said that solitary can sometimes be used before a sentence has even been given. You can have people in pre-trial detention in solitary confinement.
Yes, that can be the case, for instance, when crime suspects are to be separated to avoid any communication with one another, or also to meet needs of protection from threats from the rest of the prison population. So when there are particularly vulnerable incarcerated people, so the means that it's
theoretically
used...
they're putting people in solitary confinement for their own benefit.
Yes. Yes, that's quite a
absurd,
paradox. But you know what? Prisons can be rife with violence many times, and it's often the case that some people ask to be placed in solitary confinement.
Okay.
Yes. So the reasons that justify solitary confinement, regardless of the qualification, regardless on the legal system, are always prevention, control, protection, and punishment.
Well, that brings me nicely to, I guess, to my next question. And obviously we're talking about one side of the coin here, the prisoner's perspective or view in solitary confinement. But you obviously, talk to people who work in prisons, prison guards. And I'm guessing that they say, well, we need some kind of ultima ratio here when we have violence, when we have prisoners who are dangerous. If it's not going to be solitary confinement, what should this be?
Well, there are people who support the use of solitary confinement as the only viable solution to prison issues. However, there is a good body of evidence suggesting quite the opposite, that the lesser solitary confinement is used, the lesser violence runs over a prison.
Okay.
So solitary confinement is not the solution. The abolition of solitary confinement, which is something that I argue for, entails we should look at the bigger picture.
Yes. Okay.
So abolishing solitary confinement also means completely transforming prison, the idea of prison and how prisons are run, what is the philosophy of prisons, but also trying to avoid the word prison. So prisons should be completely transformed and turned into communities that are governed by principles of accountability, empowerment, dialogue, where rehabilitation, reintegration, restoration are the founding philosophies. So also the relationship between people inside and prison staff should be completely rethought,
reevaluated.
So in a healthy environment, there are stimuli where there are education programs, therapeutic programs, so where punishment and harshness are not the rules. Perhaps violent incidents would significantly decrease and there would not be any need for solitary confinement.
The concept would be to, rather than say let's ban solitary confinement and look for another solution, let's see why we need solitary confinement in the first place.
Exactly. Okay. So that is the bigger picture. However, even now, so this, of course, takes time. Rethinking prison takes time. But even now, we can drastically reduce the use of, I wouldn't call it solitary confinement, I would call it separation regime. So there can be incidents, okay? However, separating a person from the rest of the community should be the last resort measure, only when any other measures have been unsuccessfully tried. However, separation regimes should be subjected to strict temporal, sociability, and environmental standards. In terms of time, there should be a maximum limit of 15 days as the international standards mandate. In terms of sociability, people who are separated should still get full access to rehabilitation programs, education programs, and prison visitations, and so on and so forth. Environmentally speaking, separation cells should be as much humane and dignified and home-like as possible.
Okay, so putting more, as you suggest, then on the emphasis on separation, but not on solitary confinement itself, then,
There can be extreme instances in which separating a person for some time from the rest of the population is needed. Okay. However, that does not mean that we should inflict a double punishment.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, I understand. You're listening to Doing Time, Talking Crime, a podcast by the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Crime, Security and Law. Well, you've kind of moved the conversation on very nicely there. You've been doing my job, which is great, because we're kind of now moving away from just talking about solitary confinement to, let's say, rejuvenating the criminal justice system as a whole. I guess for centuries, probably maybe millennia, the concept of society has been you do a crime, you get, either back in the days and in some countries still, you are executed. But generally we're talking, though, about you're put in prison. And there seems to be this understanding that we've chosen to go down a route where we choose to exclude those who have wronged us. Is this human nature, this desire to exclude wrongdoers?
This is an excellent question, and actually the core issue of my second book, the real pain of punishment, eradicating social exclusion from criminal justice. So looking at history, punishment and social exclusion have always been tied up together. So prison, of course, is the par excellence way of excluding people. So you just physically remove one person from the rest of society. However, punishment has always been linked to even less visible forms of social exclusion. So we can think about people who are punished or people who with criminal records. There are many ways of excluding people who come back home. So there is a moral stigma that follows them when they apply for a job or when they apply for a scholarship, for instance. It depends on the country, but some countries fare better than others. But still, there is also a social stigma for people who were convicted for a crime. So there always been political, moral, and epistemic ways of excluding people who went through the criminal justice system. So the idea of removing socially problematic individuals has been a constant feature not only of punishment but more broadly of criminal justice systems for centuries. And Michel Foucault has extensively written about that. So this excluding people as a form of punishment has been a feature of also ancient Greek and Roman criminal justice systems, yes. And agreeing with Foucault, I do believe, that's the argument that I make in my book, I do believe that social exclusion is the ultimate pain that punishment is meant to inflict. Across all the justifications for punishment that we may give in terms of retribution, deterrence, incapacitation, or even some forms of rehabilitation, they do entail social exclusion. Why do we do that? This is another big question of my book. There are many perspectives that we can take to answer this question. We can think about this question from a social contract perspective. There are some social contractualists who have made the argument that committing a crime places the individuals in the position of being an outlaw.
And gives society then the right to
It's more
exclude.
like giving up to the protections that are granted by the social contract.
I see, okay.
And interestingly, if we think about the etymology of the word crime, if we look at ancient Greek and Roman, it comes from a verb. In Latin is cerno. In ancient Greek, it's an early interpretation of the verb krino. And both these verbs mean to divide, to separate.
Okay.
So the very idea of crime is strictly tied to that of separation, getting distant, abandonment, and exclusion. Banishment, yes, exactly. So there is a link between crime, exclusion, and punishment. And some scholars do make the arguments that punishment actually serves a reintegrative function. So it serves the function of bringing back outlaws to the realm and under the protections of the social contract by paying their dues.
Oh, I see, okay. But it probably is a question how these dues are then paid. We're talking about exclusionary concepts, but you would be interested or would like to, and I guess we talked about that briefly there with the solitary confinement, to say we shouldn't be banning solitary confinement, we should not need solitary confinement anymore. And then is that the same here? You would like to say we shouldn't, per se, ban exclusionary criminal justice. We should get to a point where we have inclusionary criminal justice. Yes. Yeah.
And that's another big part of my monograph. So can we rethink of justice? Well, thanks for asking.
What is this alternative approach? I know you talked about it a little bit before, but can we reshuffle the cards? Would be the question one, I guess. And question two, are some countries doing this already? And if so, why are they doing it better than other countries?
First, let me ask you a question.
Yeah, sure. Whoa, okay. I'm taken aback, but sure.
Could you think of justice without prison?
Probably not, no. I think due to socialization and the concept of serving time, no, I think no would be the simple answer.
But if I told you that there are out there alternatives quite effective to deal with problematic behaviors like crime, and that alternatives also involves the participation of community members. It involves dialogue, and that kind of approach has beneficial effects on both the victim and the perpetrator. Would you consider the possibility of decreasing the use of prisons?
Certainly, I would agree. When I hear that, I say, yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. No, I mean, why not? But of course, if maybe I'm the one directly affected by said crime, something's happened to me or a family member, then I wonder if I would still think, throw away the key, or I know I'm willing to go in a restorative way.
This is a perfectly reasonable, it is called reactive attitude.
Yeah.
For sure, there are some behaviors that are particularly serious that do involve a specific kind of intervention. However, the argument that I make is that, so first of all, let's look at reality. In the vast majority of cases, people who are in prison have not committed a violent crime.
Okay.
So let's look at the numbers and let's look at the type of people that end up in prison. So there are many traumatizing situations in the background of most people who end up in the prison environment. We can think about, we should start with them. Instead of looking at hard cases that are not the majority,
okay, so
we should look at the majority. Yes.
The heavier or the more serious crimes, which only form a very small percentile of the prison population.
Yes.
And say, let's look at this remaining, I don't know what it is, 95%, 98%. The vast majority are in there for non-violent offences.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So we can definitely rethink of criminal justice for minor crimes, non-violent crimes. Yeah. We can find alternatives. The alternatives are already out there. So now there is an increasing use of restorative justice pretty much everywhere. Some countries are more into restorative justice than others, but still restorative justice is becoming an integral component, absolutely, of criminal justice proceedings all over the criminal justice process, from pre-trial to the sentencing stage to the post-sentence. And it seems to work particularly well. Now, I am not for an entirely restorative justice system because I do think that there are some procedural issues there in terms of procedural rights. However, I've seen with my own eyes how restorative justice works. I've heard witnesses and crime survivors who went through restorative justice, and there were very positive results, but also in terms of rehabilitation. Perpetrators who decide to undergo restorative justice programs do see the benefits in terms of taking ownership of their behavior, understanding the consequences, and also repair the damages that they did with the wrong behavior.
So it's giving me a new take on it to say,
let's not say
it's not because someone who murders someone can then have a chat and with a family and everything's better. But it's no. Let's say we're talking about a certain, or not a subset of it, we're talking about a large portion of offenders where this could be a viable approach.
Well, restorative justice is also being used with violent crimes. Right now it is mostly used for reducing the sentence. When people decide, so restorative justice is a matter of choice. So people have to choose. There must be the consent on the part, especially of the victim, of course, or victim's family, to undertake a restorative justice process. But there are cases where restorative justice is used also to face the consequences of particularly violent crimes. And it looks like that it works. Okay,
so that would be one major form of inclusion, would be to adopt a far more restorative justice-oriented system.
That would be one way. Another way would be that of providing diversion programs that are filled with education, job training, therapeutic programs.
Well, that's one of the questions you're going to have to deal with, is how to win society over with a new approach. And I guess that's one way you can say, hey, we're looking at maybe reoffending rates, for instance. Are they then shown to be lower with restorative justice or diversionary approaches?
Winning community support, this is a good question. Well, people just want to feel safe in the end of the day. Yep. And I asked you earlier, would you imagine a world, a criminal justice system without prisons? And you said no, because perhaps you were not aware that there can be alternatives out there. Yeah. So what is important about winning community support is building knowledge about alternatives, building knowledge about why alternatives may work, why alternatives can benefit the community as a whole in terms of public safety. I am thinking about programs of collaborative education, It's something that Columbia University does. So the Center for Justice, when I was at Columbia University, runs is a wonderful program involving multiple stakeholders, community members, formerly incarcerated people, especially youth, policymakers, and academics who discuss especially youth problems in relation to delinquency and work together on policy proposals to change something in the system. And this is very, very effective because it brings people from different background and completely different roles. So people who make decisions and people who are the targets of these decisions to discuss from their own perspective and with their own expertise. And this is a truly interdisciplinary effort that provides solutions that take into account different voices. So just imposing decisions or policies from the above without knowing how exactly it feels like, it looks like from the bottom, it only provides a partial solution to the problem. So we really need to consider the voices of many people who
all actors who are involved.
And involving the community in this process is just fundamental to build knowledge and to encourage support for alternative ways of dealing with crime.
And then science has then the role to, one, win community support, but how does legal academia, how do you get, I mean, this is obviously happening at Columbia University, but I've not heard about it, or person X has not heard about it, or how can academia get the word out there? And because there's obviously kind of grassroots, often it's probably plenty of them, but we've got this legal system that's been built over millennia. How can this word be spread that there's an alternative?
Things are changing also in legal academia. So every legal scholar knows that legal tradition refused to die, or stubbornly refused to die. However, I do think that legal academia bears a huge responsibility in supporting change. So legal scholarship does have an influence on criminal justice policy and indirectly on public opinion. So having legal academics getting out there and talking to the community would be an excellent way to bring their work outside of the ivory tower and also be more sensitive to listen to voices from the outside to bring change to their own work. That's a little bit what happened to me when I was in America, that I was working not only with the community but also with people who were implicated in the criminal legal system. And that for me was absolutely life-changing because it completely changed my way of thinking of myself as a legal scholar, of my way of doing legal scholarship. So sometimes we write and make arguments about punishment and prison without having a clue about how a prison looks like.
Right.
And we write about people that we never talk to. So I think that to make change also in legal scholarship and to bring the change to those who are in the position to make decisions, we should pay more attention to the people we write about and get their expertise and give them a voice also in our writings. I think that that's what legal academia can do. And in terms of spreading the work of legal academics, participating in community and public initiatives or making academics events open to the public, to the common public, but also social media, also this podcast.
I was going to say, this is the
perfect So the podcast is a wonderful way of taking academic work out there because people don't know. There is this presumption that legal academics especially, they are completely separated. They live in the world of theories and so on and so forth, but it's not necessarily like that.
I must say that strikes me sometimes when I have guests on the show and I think, hey, great ideas, but I'm like, wow, how does that work in practice, I mean, taking it from the books and actually making it work are two different things.
Well, we should also be careful with our language, so making our language more accessible to people who are not familiar with the law and with justice terminology. But there are many ways that this can be done.
Academia can get the word out there that there are alternatives to exclusion.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What then would you say to the naysayers, those who are like, nope, system works just fine, doesn't need to be changed?
Where is the evidence?
That the system works fine? well, they commit the crime, they go inside, I don't have to deal with them anymore.
Well, but give me evidence.
Perhaps there is no evidence that the system's working. I
There's,
know there's plenty of evidence that the system's overloaded and not working. And so that's what you would revert that question then to them
there
and
is
say,
plenty of evidence showing the exact opposite. And
Okay.
it's not only a matter of recidivism. We use recidivism as the par excellence measure to see whether something is working out.
Okay.
Recidivism cannot be the only measure. Can we find different criteria to say whether a crime response is working fine or not in terms of well-being or in terms of establishment of institutional bonds or social bonds? So can we come up with different ways of assessing whether something is working properly or not? We consider the numbers. So how expensive is a given measure, how good it is at preventing reoffending. But do we also consider more individual criteria like psychological well-being
Yes.
or engagement with job and education or activism?
Okay, and that then I guess goes back to that fact of how do we get the word out, and that you're going to need to find a new set of criteria to how we consider or what we consider successful.
Yeah.
Okay. Then if we're onto the naysayers, although you've kind of told me now I know that what we should say to the naysayers, but there is also obviously those who would say, hey, and maybe they're in the naysayer camp, or they call themselves the realists, but they're like, prison, it's black or white. You're in, you're out. For us, it's simple. What you're talking about, Federica, is going to be really awesome in theory, but resource intensive in practice. How can we change a system and isn't it going to cost us the world to do so?
So prisons do have high costs in terms of public spending, but we should look at this from a broader perspective in the long term. So for sure, implementing alternatives may engage more human resources and more financial resources. And perhaps in the short term, that can be maybe more expensive than running prisons. But is this a strong argument to say, well, we shouldn't try a different way and we should stick with prisons, although we know very well that prison don't work?
Yeah, right, okay. The short term, it could be a little bit more expensive to establish something, but I guess that's...
People who are in prisons are people. We should answer these questions by looking at fundamental rights, individual rights. I think it's problematic to put it from an economic perspective, like quantifying the value of people.
Sure.
So perhaps we should reframe this question by considering the fact that the people who get in touch with the criminal legal system are still people with fundamental rights. And liberal democracies cannot allow that these rights are violated by the state.
You can't put a price on those rights.
Absolutely,
That's right, yeah.
yes.
Okay. I guess over the centuries, in many countries, we have seen positive developments in criminal justice. In many countries have abandoned the death penalty, moved away from corporal punishment. So I figure there is hope that change could happen. Is this a generational project that we're talking about here?
Yeah, well, I see that young generations of law students and legal scholars are way more open to rethinking justice through different lenses. So I do think that a change will happen. It is happening already.
Okay, that's great to hear.
Yeah, it's going to be a long process. So I don't expect that this big change might happen like tomorrow or in 1 year. So it may take a while, but I am confident.
Okay. I figure it will be also in different stages in different countries, areas of the world where there's more openness or willingness to try something out, and then...
Some countries are doing better than others, for sure. Okay. They're more advanced in terms of also prison environments. They are way more humane. Like I'm thinking about the Norwegian system, which is very famous for having very humane and dignified facilities. Other systems are doing way worse than others.
Okay, so there's room for improvement.
Yeah, but the fact that we are concretely discussing this and also with the aid of non-legal disciplines, science or technology, so we are using non-legal tools to bring alternatives to the law and to the justice system. So I think that that's where the law and justice is going, and I hope it's going to work out.
Yeah, wonderful. I think after our discussion, I also hope it'll work out. Well, Federica, thanks so much. I mean, you've given us plenty of information to digest, some really great ideas about how science can be used to make the criminal justice system more humane. I'll be interested to see how things develop then over the next generations or two. So thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to today's program. If you would like to hear additional podcasts or learn more about our research, please visit our website at www.csl.mpg.de.